There's a faucet being held in a hardware store by hands that have no intention of buying it. The faucet is off the display shelf, turned slowly under the fluorescent light, examined from the underside where the supply lines connect, and the cartridge mechanism is visible through the opening where installation would occur. The cartridge is a single-handle ceramic disc design. The cam that redirects flow from cold to hot is visible through the brass housing. The rubber seats that form the primary seal are visible as dark crescents against the polished valve body. The hands can see how the water will move before any water is moved. They can see the path from supply line to cartridge to spout, the pressure differential that makes the flow possible, the temperature mixing that occurs inside the cartridge when the handle is turned. They can see which component will fail first. It will be the rubber seats. They always are. The seats will compress over years of use, and the compression will allow water to bypass the seal, and the faucet will drip, and the drip will be intermittent, and the intermittent drip will be the faucet's way of announcing that the seats have completed their service life and require replacement. The faucet is set back on the shelf. The hands walk away carrying something that weighs nothing and costs nothing and is more satisfying than the faucet itself. The understanding of how the faucet works. The complete, three-dimensional, physically intuited comprehension of a system that most people experience as a handle that produces water and a phone call when the handle stops producing water. This is not curiosity in the casual sense, not the idle interest of someone who finds plumbing mildly engaging on a Saturday afternoon. Something more structural is operating inside the person who cannot look at an object without understanding its interior architecture, and it connects to a way of inhabiting the physical world that most people abandoned somewhere around the age of 12, when the education system and the consumer economy collaboratively agree that understanding how things work is a specialization rather than a literacy, and that the appropriate response to a broken faucet is not comprehension, but a phone number. Embodied cognition, the principle that thinking is not confined to the brain but extends into the body and the physical environment, applies to this person with a specificity that the general research does not always emphasize. The knowledge of mechanisms is not stored as verbal information. It is not a list of facts about faucets or engines or circuits. It is stored as spatial intuition, as three-dimensional models that rotate and disassemble and reassemble inside the mind with the same fluency that physical objects rotate and disassemble and reassemble under the hands. When the faucet is examined in the hardware store, the brain is running a simulation that is, neurologically, nearly identical to the simulation it would run if the hands were physically taking the faucet apart on a workbench. The motor cortex activates. The spatial reasoning centers engage. The hands make micro movements, turning the faucet, tilting it, adjusting the angle to see a component that is partially hidden, and each micro movement is a query posed to the object, and the object answers in a language that the hands speak fluently and that the mouth would struggle to translate. The understanding is not abstract. It is embodied. The logic of the mechanism is felt in the body before it could be drawn on paper. A clock at a yard sale. The back opened with a thumbnail on the case lip. The movement visible inside, brass and steel in a mainspring coiled with a tension that is decades old and still potent. The gear train traced from mainspring through the wheel train to the escapement, each tooth meshing with the next in a ratio that determines the speed at which the hands move. The eyes follow the power transmission the way water follows a channel, not by effort but by inclination. The clock is set down. The diagnosis is complete. The mainspring is intact, but the escapement pivot is worn and the pallet fork is not engaging the escape wheel cleanly. The knowing was not a thought. It was a physical sensation. The eyes saw the wear, the way hands feel a rough surface, not by analysis, but by recognition. Dr. Kelly Lambert's effort. Getting the finish right is the hardest part of any project. If you have ever dealt with bubbles, streaks, or a coat that just would not dry, we put together a guide that covers everything the can does not tell you. Scan the code on screen or check the first comment below. Effort-driven reward circuit provides the neurochemical explanation for why the understanding produces genuine physical pleasure. The pathway connecting interaction with physical objects to serotonin and dopamine production does not require full physical manipulation to activate. Mental simulation of physical interaction, the cognitive process that occurs when a mechanism is studied and its operation modeled internally, activates adjacent neural regions at a lower but measurable intensity. The pleasure of understanding how a faucet works is a partial activation of the same circuit that fires fully during the act of repairing a faucet. The understanding is a rehearsal for the reward. And the rehearsal itself produces enough neurochemical return to make the behavior self-reinforcing. The person who cannot stop seeing how things work is not merely observant. They are feeding a reward circuit that was tuned early in life to respond to mechanical comprehension the way other circuits are tuned to respond to social approval or financial gain. The currency is different. The circuit does not care. It fires in response to understanding, and understanding is available everywhere, at every hardware store, in every building, inside every appliance, behind every wall plate, and the availability makes the feeding continuous and the satiation impossible. A framing wall at a construction site, visible from the road through a truck window. The header identified over the window opening before the truck reaches the intersection. The size of the header estimated from the span, the king studs and jack studs counted. The load path traced from ridge beam through the rafters, through the top plate, through the header, through the jack stud, to the sole plate, to the foundation. The assessment takes approximately 3 seconds and is not voluntary. The brain performs it the way other brains register a face in a crowd or a familiar song from across a room. The assessment is not useful in any practical sense. The house is being built by someone else. The assessment is performed because the perceptual system is organized to perform it, and the organization is permanent. And the permanence is not a choice. Internal locus of control provides the psychological architecture beneath the neurochemistry. A person who understands how things work inhabits a world that is fundamentally knowable. This is not a philosophical position arrived at through reasoning. It is a lived experience reinforced by decades of evidence. Faucets are not mysteries. They are assemblies. Cars are not sealed units operated by incantation. They are systems of interdependent components, each one performing a function that can be identified, tested, and if necessary, replaced. Houses are not structures that appear. They are sequences of decisions made in a specific order by people who understood what they were doing. And the decisions are legible to any eye that was taught to read them. The knowability is not a comfort in the soft, reassuring sense. It is structural. It is a foundational belief about the relationship between the self and the physical world. The world can be parsed, diagnosed, and acted upon by a single person with sufficient attention and sufficient willingness to look. In a culture that increasingly presents technology as magic, appliances as sealed, disposable units, and mechanical systems as impenetrable complexities that require certified specialists, the person who knows how things work is performing an act of quiet resistance. The resistance is not ideological. It is perceptual. The world is not opaque to these hands. It never has been. And the insistence on seeing through the surface to the mechanism underneath is not a hobby. It is a way of being in the world that refuses the passivity that the consumer economy requires in order to function. The capacity has a developmental origin that the reminiscence bump makes precise. The perceptual filter was installed early, in a garage or a basement or a shop class or a backyard. Someone older opened the back of something and said the equivalent of, "Look at this. This is how it works." The words varied. The lesson did not. The lesson was that the inside of things is not inaccessible. It is available. It has always been available. The manufacturer sealed the case, not because the mechanism is unknowable, but because the manufacturer profits from the assumption that it is. The person who opened the case, the father or the grandfather or the uncle or the shop teacher, was not merely showing a mechanism. They were demonstrating a posture toward the physical world. The posture was, I am not a passive consumer of this object. I am a participant in its existence. I understand why it does what it does, and the understanding gives me a relationship with it that the person who does not understand will never have. The boy who received that lesson became the person who cannot look at a faucet without seeing the cartridge inside it. And the person has been looking at every faucet and every engine and every building and every bridge and every electrical panel with the same eyes ever since. The filter cannot be removed. It is not a setting. It is the lens itself. There was a generation for whom this understanding was not specialized knowledge, but basic literacy. The man who could not identify a blown fuse, diagnose a sticking valve, or understand why a door swelled in summer and shrank in winter was considered incomplete in the same way that a person who could not read was considered incomplete. The knowledge was assumed. The absence of the knowledge was a deficit. The industrial and post-industrial economies systematically converted this literacy into a specialty, then a service, then a subscription. The sealed phone, the car that requires proprietary diagnostic software to read its own error codes, the appliance whose repair manual is available only to certified technicians. Each step moved the understanding further from the hands that used the object and closer to the corporation that manufactured it. The person who knows how things work is the last carrier of a literacy that the economy has been methodically eliminating for profit. And the quiet satisfaction they feel when examining a faucet in a hardware store is the satisfaction of reading a sentence in a language that the world is trying to make extinct. There is someone who watches movies through a filter that cannot be disabled. When a car chase occurs on screen, the eyes are on the road surface, calculating friction coefficients and stopping distances based on the apparent speed and the apparent surface conditions. When a building explodes in an action sequence, the debris pattern is evaluated for structural plausibility, and the evaluation finds the pattern implausible, and the implausibility is noted internally without comment because the comment would not be received well by anyone else in the room. The movies are not ruined. They are experienced through a perceptual system that cannot stop processing the physical world, even when the physical world is fictional. The filter does not have an off switch. There's another who cannot buy an appliance without removing an access panel within the first hour of ownership. Not to inspect for defects, not to verify quality, to understand, to see the compressor, the relay, the thermostat, the wiring harness, to trace the circuit from the plug through the power supply to the control board to the output. The appliance works whether it is understood or not, but the understood appliance is not the same object as the not understood appliance. It is a known system, and the knowing changes the relationship from dependency, in which the appliance is a sealed provider of a function that can be withdrawn at any moment without explanation, to partnership, in which the appliance is a system whose behavior is predictable and whose failures are diagnosable and whose continued operation is, in some small but real sense, a collaboration between the machine and the hands that comprehend it. There is another who took apart a watch that was given as a gift, not because the watch was broken, because the watch was ticking, the ticking implied a mechanism, and the mechanism implied a logic, and the logic demanded to be seen in the same way that a sentence in a book demands to be read by a person who is literate. The caseback was removed. The movement was examined under a loupe, the balance wheel oscillating at 28,000 beats per hour. The mainspring delivering power through a gear train whose ratios were calculated to produce exactly 1 revolution of the minute hand per hour and exactly 1 revolution of the hour hand per 12 hours. The elegance of the solution, the mathematical precision of the gears, the physical beauty of a system that converts a coiled spring into the measurement of time was appreciated for several minutes in silence. The watch was reassembled. It still works. It now ticks with a quality that has changed, not in volume or speed, but in meaning. The ticking is no longer anonymous. It is a known conversation between a spring and a set of gears. The knowing adds a dimension that the gift giver did not intend, but would not object to if they understood what had been gained. There is another who showed a child how a hand drill works, not how to use it, not the safety rules, not the procedure for drilling a straight hole, how it works. The gear ratio between the handle and the chuck, the mechanism that allows the jaws of the chuck to open and close, the relationship between the speed of the handle and the speed of the bit, and how the gear ratio trades speed for torque, and how the torque is what allows the bit to cut through materials that the handle alone could not affect. The child listened with the particular intensity of a person encountering a way of seeing the world that school has not provided and may never provide. The child picked up the drill afterward and turned the handle slowly, watching the gears mesh, watching the chuck rotate at a different speed than the handle, watching the ratio in action. No hole was drilled, no hole was needed. The seeing was the lesson. The lesson was that the world has an inside, and the inside is available, and the availability is a gift that not everyone receives, and that no one who receives it ever forgets. The inheritance was transferred in that moment, from the hands that opened the drill to the eyes that watched the gears mesh, and the transfer was as old as the first human who picked up a rock and understood, without language, what it could become. There's another whose grandchildren bring broken toys to family dinners the way other grandchildren bring drawings. The toys are examined at the table. The diagnosis is performed aloud, narrated for the audience, not as performance, but as pedagogy. The spring is overwound, the gear has lost a tooth, the battery contacts are corroded. The narration is the lesson, and the lesson is not about the toy. It is about the posture. The posture that says, this is not broken, this is not working yet. And the distance between those two sentences is the distance between a person who calls for help and a person who opens the back panel. What most people see when they observe someone who cannot stop understanding how things work is a mildly interesting trait, a useful skill, something handy at dinner parties when the dishwasher makes a sound. What is actually happening is a way of perceiving reality that the consumer economy is systematically and profitably designed to eliminate. The embodied cognition research tells us the understanding is physical, stored in the body, activated by proximity to any mechanical or structural system. The effort-driven rewards circuit tells us the comprehension produces genuine neurochemical pleasure, a partial activation of the same reward pathway that fires during physical repair, available on demand to any nervous system that has been trained to look for it. The internal locus of control research tells us the understanding is not decorative or recreational, it is structural. It is the belief that the world is knowable and that knowing gives a person power in a world that would prefer they remained dependent on systems they do not understand. The person who knows how things work is not quaint. They are not a relic, they are necessary. They are necessary to a civilization that is rapidly losing the ability to comprehend the systems on which it depends, and the loss is not abstract. It is measured in landfills full of appliances that failed because a 20-cent component was not replaced because no one in the household knew it existed. The quiet satisfaction felt in a hardware store, turning a faucet in the light, reading its interior like a page in a familiar book, is not trivial. It is the felt experience of literacy in a world that is choosing, deliberately and for profit, to forget how to read. If you have ever taken something apart, not because it was broken, but because you needed to see how it was made, and felt a settling in your chest when the mechanism revealed itself, a settling that you have felt before and will feel again, and that you cannot fully explain to anyone who has not felt it themselves, that settling was not idle pleasure. It was the confirmation of a belief you have carried since someone first opened the back of a thing and showed you the inside, and the world became transparent and has never been opaque again. The question is not why you see everything this way. The question is what kind of world we are building for the children who will never be shown the inside of anything, who will grow up believing that the appropriate response to a broken object is a replacement, and the appropriate response to a system they do not understand is a phone call, and whether they will miss what they never knew they were supposed to see, and whether the missing, when it arrives, will have a name, or whether it will simply feel like something is not working, and they will not know how to open the back and look. If this video gave you a new way to understand what happens in your workshop, there is something we made for you. In the first comment below this video, there is a link to a guide we put together on how to get a perfect finish every time. Hundreds of subscribers already have their copy. It might be worth a look.